Taurus 30, Peacock parading on an ancient lawn. Well, the ancient lawn is our racial heritage. We go back hundreds of years, thousands maybe, in terms of our cultural material, what we kind of have as the foundation out of which we come, is the context of our lives. Each culture is different. Each country, each subsection of a country has a very definite way of doing things, which is quite different from the neighbours, and they like to make that point that we're different from them. And that's what the peacock is doing. The peacock struts and proclaims its splendour. I am like this and I'm amazing, says the peacock. And yet it does that in the context of what it is not. The ancient lawn is grass. It's all the same and one colour. And the peacock is ever so different indeed, multicoloured. So we have the difference here between diversity of expression and unity of beingness. And the image tells us how we are as people trying to strut and proclaim in the context of that which is unmovable, that which is old and stable, permanent, as far as anything can be permanent. Usually we forget that. It is totally normal for everyone to be somewhat rebellious. Everyone breaks the law to some extent, even if it's only once going over the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit. Everyone does it. And most of us do it a lot. And even if we don't break the law very often, we go against our parents' desire of what we would become. And we particularly go through that at a certain age, 18 to 21, for example. And we become able to identify ourselves as not them. I'm not doing that. That's what my dad does. I'm not going to do it. My mum's wanting me to do this. I'm not going to do that. So we contextualize our own rebellious spirit against the ancient lawn of the culture, the heritage, the ancestral heritage that our parents bring our attention to by simply being the way they are. So we see, therefore, that our rebellious sense of unique identity is nothing more than the other side of theirs. We're rebelling against something that's established, and that thing which is established is actually contributing because it shows us the direction in which we rebel. And typically, a rebel will move off against the parents or against the school or the culture in the opposite direction, only to bounce back to some extent later towards becoming a mirror of what the parents were. Not fully, and usually not consciously, but you wake up at a certain age, perhaps after the age of 40, you start to realize that you're doing things that your mum and dad used to do. And you like it. You want to do it that way because you've seen the other way and you don't like it so much. So we have this examination of rebelliousness and oldness, the authority of age, the status quo of an elder representing that which was still worth keeping from the past. This juxtaposition of those two things is what we're studying here. And it's ever so important, especially in astrology, for example. This is the dance of Uranus and Saturn. The mythology that goes along with this is that the rebelliousness against the tyrant authority eventually turns itself into the authority. That's the story of Uranus and Kronos, Uranus and Saturn. Saturn rose up against his tyrant father only to become a tyrant himself. And we have to look at that within ourselves now, applying this on a very personal level. The extent to which we have rebelled in order to proclaim self and to discover ourselves to be not one of the herd, but something special. We all want to be special in our own different ways. So the extent to which we do that on the one hand, and then the extent to which we relax back into the familiar, old, established, tried and tested ways of doing things, much more like our parents or our culture. We cannot establish identity except in this process. We won't do it. You need something to bounce off in order to establish whether you are like that or not like that. And so it's an inevitable process that we go through. And the place that we end up is either decided consciously to some extent or unconsciously. And I think this is the key point here. If you look at yourself and you just sort of see how much of what you are is against the status quo, and how much of what you are is in favor of the status quo, and how much is in between, because that in-between land is real. The other two are not really authentic. If we're just going along with the way things are because that's the line of least resistance, or we're rebelliously objecting and rejecting and getting off on our passion, neither of those are conscious behaviors. But if we actually think, okay, parents did it that way, culture does it that way, I feel like this when I'm actually in my passion, this is my decided course of action, consciously making a decision about how to be, and therefore who to be, then there's great wisdom in that, unusual wisdom. To reach this level of wisdom, it is necessary to parade oneself in public in order just to see how silly that can be. I mean, on one level, the peacock is very beautiful indeed, really. And yet, on another level, it's quite preposterous. It's wastage of energy. It's exaggerated show just to attract a mate. And the way it walks and the lack of defenses that it has, it's a preposterous animal. So we have those two kind of sides to ourselves. One part of us is beautiful, unique, to be admired as an expression of the life joy that there exists within us. And another part of us is actually preposterous. We're just behaving in a silly way. The ego has become attached to itself, and egotism always looks quite ridiculous through the eyes of someone else. All this posturing and pomposity and overblown confidence, and also the reverse of that, hiding away like a wallflower, not being seen, not being willing to speak up. That's equally preposterous. So we can't know which bits of ourselves are authentic, creative, unique expressions of joy on the one hand, and which are silly, preposterous pomposities on the other. We just don't know. We can't feel that. That's not obvious because we're blinded in some way by the needs of the ego to think of itself as important and special and never wrong. So we exhibit ourselves into society in order that society can examine that, measure that. And society gives us really clear feedback about what bits are okay and what bits are not. The tactic of ridicule will try and bring us down. And when we're ridiculed, we usually change our behavior. Or we firm it up and we say, no, if you want to ridicule me, you ain't part of my life. That's how you firm it up. But if actually somebody continually laughs at you and embarrasses you, eventually you'll learn that that's one of the preposterous bits. That little bit needs to change. And we see this especially when it comes to people who are taking too much authority than is appropriate, partly because they're underpowered and partly because the situation doesn't need it. Then there will be ridicule to bring down the overblown authority. So we put ourselves out into the world so that we can be measured, examined and corrected. And we take the feedback of society and our friendship circle and so on as helpful so that we can move forward to improve and perfect the personality. So the peacock is the principle within us of showing off in the context of what is the status quo, what went before, so that we can determine the difference between creative, beautiful self-expression and ridiculous prancing of the egotistical side of our ego.